For years, Sarah felt trapped in a life she never imagined for herself. She had always been an optimistic person, someone who believed in kindness and the good in people. But somehow, over time, the world around her had begun to change, and not in a way she ever expected. Her once promising future now seemed clouded with fear and doubt, and every attempt she made to escape the grip of her troubles only seemed to drag her deeper into darkness. It all started innocently enough. When Sarah first met Tom, she was charmed by his warmth, his kind smile, and his ability to make her feel special. He seemed like the perfect man for her, a gentle soul who always said the right things at the right times. Her friends saw how happy she was, and they congratulated her on finding someone so wonderful. But things weren't as they seemed. At first, everything felt perfect. They went on dates, shared jokes, and spent time with one another, as if they were meant to be together. But slowly, the cracks in Tom's charming exterior started to show. It began with small, unnoticeable changes. A comment about how Sarah's clothes didn't look quite right, or how she should wear her hair differently. At first, she brushed it off, thinking it was just him being protective or trying to help her improve. But as the days passed, his comments became sharper, more frequent, and more personal. Over time, Sarah began to feel like she was losing a part of herself. She changed her appearance to meet his standards, giving up things she once loved because Tom didn't approve. She started to avoid friends who didn't fit into his view of the world, slowly isolating herself from everything she once held dear. She convinced herself that these changes were for the better, that this was just what people did when they were in love, sacrifice for the person they cared about. But soon, the changes in their relationship became more than just hurtful words. Tom's temper began to flare up unexpectedly, and the small arguments they once had now turned into heated, emotionally draining fights. He'd raise his voice, call her names, and tell her she wasn't good enough. When it was over, he would apologize, telling her it was all a misunderstanding and that he didn't mean it. He'd promised to do better, and Sarah, feeling guilty for not making things better, would forgive him. Despite the pain, Sarah wanted to believe that things could improve. She thought that if she just tried harder, loved him more, maybe he would change. But with each passing day, the emotional weight of the relationship grew heavier. Every time she tried to reach out to someone, her family, her friends, even the local support groups, she was met with the same dismissive response. No one truly understood what she was going through. Some told her that every relationship had its ups and downs and that things would get better with time. Others simply told her she was imagining things, that it wasn't as bad as she thought. The worst part wasn't the hurtful words or the isolation. It was the disbelief. When Sarah tried to speak up about what was happening, her cries for help were always ignored or minimized. People around her refused to see the truth. When she turned to the police, they didn't take her seriously. The officers seemed indifferent, even dismissive, treating her concerns as though they were nothing more than a misunderstanding between a couple. "You should try talking it out," they would say. Or maybe he's just having a bad day. Everyone goes through tough times. Sarah would leave those conversations feeling even more powerless and confused. Was she overreacting? Was she being too sensitive? Why couldn't anyone see the real problem? As months turned into years, Sarah's spirit began to fade. She no longer recognized the person she had become. The bright, optimistic young woman who had once dreamed of a happy, fulfilling life was now someone struggling to find her voice. Someone who had been so worn down by the hurt and isolation that she began to doubt her own worth. Her self-esteem was shattered, and she often wondered if she deserved to be treated the way she was. She tried to hide her pain behind a mask, smiling through her interactions with others, pretending that everything was fine. Her friends began to notice that she seemed different, more withdrawn, quieter, distant. But when they asked if everything was okay, Sarah always said, "I'm fine," even though she wasn't. She was terrified of burdening anyone with her problems. And deep down, she had started to believe that no one would understand. If the people closest to her didn't see what was happening, how could anyone else? The isolation was the hardest part. Her world became smaller and smaller as Tom began to control more aspects of her life. He insisted on knowing where she was at all times, questioned her every decision, and made her feel guilty for even thinking about reaching out to others. He would call her weak if she dared express any discomfort with his actions, making her feel as though she was the one who was wrong. She felt like a prisoner in her own life, and the loneliness grew unbearable. But despite everything, Sarah clung to a tiny thread of hope. She told herself that one day things would get better. Maybe if she held on long enough, things would change. She told herself that she had to stay for the sake of the relationship, for the hope that things would improve. But deep inside, she knew something wasn't right, and the fear of being alone or not being believed kept her stuck. How could she escape when no one was there to help her? It was at this lowest point that Sarah made one final attempt to reach out for help. She had heard about a local shelter, a place where women who were going through similar struggles could find refuge. It was the only hope she had left, so with shaky hands and a racing heart, she dialed the number. But when the person on the other end answered, the conversation didn't go as Sarah had hoped. The shelter was full. They had no room for someone like her. She was told to try again in a few weeks, but deep down she knew she couldn't wait that long. She felt abandoned, her last chance slipping away. But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. She knew she had to try one more time, even if it felt like no one was listening. She clung to the belief that if she kept pushing, kept fighting, someone, somewhere, would hear her. And so she made a silent vow to herself. No matter how hard it got, no matter how lonely or desperate she felt, she wouldn't stop trying to find the help she so desperately needed. Little did she know her life was about to change in a way she couldn't have imagined. As the weeks passed, Sarah's world seemed to get darker and darker. The small hope she had once clung to, believing things would improve, was beginning to fade. Every day felt like a repeat of the one before, each moment adding weight to the invisible chains that bound her. Tom's behavior, which had started with minor complaints and criticisms, had grown into something far more consuming and unsettling. He no longer made little comments about her appearance. Instead, his words seemed to drain her spirit, leaving her feeling like she was constantly walking on eggshells. She began to believe that maybe she was truly as worthless as he said she was. The abuse, in its many forms, had become a regular part of her life. It wasn't just the cruel remarks anymore. Now it was a mix of controlling behavior, emotional manipulation, and subtle threats. Tom would tell Sarah who she could speak to, where she could go, and even what she could wear. Every decision she made was questioned, as if her judgment was forever suspect. He would often guilt-trip her into agreeing with him on everything, making her feel as though her every thought and feeling was wrong. At times she would try to stand up for herself, but those attempts were always met with a cold silence or a scornful response that left her feeling small and insignificant. Slowly, Sarah's voice began to fade away. She no longer argued back. She simply accepted that her feelings didn't matter. But as painful as it was, Sarah still loved Tom. She clung to the belief that maybe, just maybe, he could change. Maybe if she were more patient, more understanding, things would improve. Every time he apologized and promised to do better, a part of her felt hopeful again. She began to think that all relationships had their ups and downs, and maybe this was just one of those difficult times. She kept reminding herself that people go through hard phases, and it was up to her to support him through it. But deep down, Sarah knew something was terribly wrong. It wasn't normal to feel afraid of your partner, to dread coming home, to constantly fear making a mistake. Even more, it wasn't normal to feel like your life was slowly being chipped away, one piece at a time. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing herself, but she didn't know how to stop it. How could she escape when the one person who was supposed to love her was the one making her feel this way? Then one day, after another fight that had left her feeling completely drained, Sarah found herself sitting alone in their small living room, staring at the empty walls. She felt like a shadow of the woman she used to be. There were no longer any smiles, no longer any joy in the things she used to love. Everything that had once made her happy seemed distant, like a dream she could no longer reach. She no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. Her face was tired, her eyes dull with exhaustion. She had become a stranger to herself. Her mind raced with thoughts of what she should do next. She had already tried asking for help before, but no one had taken her seriously. The police, her friends, even family, every time she reached out, she was either ignored or brushed aside. They told her to be patient, to work things out with Tom. Maybe it was her fault, they suggested. Maybe she was making things worse. But Sarah knew deep down that it wasn't her fault. She knew she wasn't the one who had changed. It was Tom. Yet each time she tried to explain what was happening, she felt like no one believed her. It was as if she was invisible, and her pain was something no one was willing to acknowledge. She began to feel like a ghost in her own life, drifting through the days, always pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. Even though she tried to wear a mask of normalcy, the weight of the pain in her heart was unbearable. She would put on a smile for the world, but inside she was falling apart. The emotional toll of pretending to be happy when she wasn't was exhausting, yet she still couldn't bring herself to fully break free. She didn't know how. Her whole world was tied to Tom, and even though she knew things weren't right, she couldn't imagine life without him. She had grown so accustomed to the constant emotional pull, the ups and downs, that it felt like the only reality she knew. One night, she couldn't take it anymore. She broke down in tears, unable to keep the pain inside any longer. She was alone in the house, sitting in the dark, her tears staining her pillow as she tried to hold in the sobs. She had reached the point where she could no longer pretend. The sadness, the confusion, the loneliness, it all became too much. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd been enduring. She had always pushed the feelings aside, telling herself that she had to be strong, but now she couldn't hide from the truth any longer. She was terrified. Terrified of what would happen if things didn't change, terrified of what Tom might do next, and terrified that she would never find a way out. The next day, Sarah decided to do something she had been afraid to do for a long time. She reached out again. This time it was to a local support group for women. She had heard about it before but had never felt brave enough to make contact. She felt too ashamed to ask for help, too embarrassed to admit that she needed it. But now, with no one to turn to and no more options left, she called. She explained her situation, her voice shaking as she spoke. She told them everything, the isolation, the emotional manipulation, the constant fear. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. But after she hung up, something unexpected happened. She felt a glimmer of hope. Unfortunately, that hope was short-lived. When she called the shelter later that afternoon, she was told they were full and couldn't take her in. The woman on the other end of the phone was kind, but there was nothing she could do. "Try again in a few weeks," she said. "Maybe there will be space by then." Sarah's heart sank. She didn't know if she could wait that long. She was running out of time, running out of strength. The few words of comfort she had received felt like a cruel reminder of how alone she truly was. Sarah spent the next few days in a blur. She didn't know what to do anymore. The walls seemed to be closing in, and her hope, which had just begun to rise, was fading fast. She began to question everything. Herself, her relationship, even her decision to reach out for help. Maybe there was something wrong with her for not being able to fix things herself. Maybe she wasn't strong enough. But as she sat there contemplating her next move, a new thought emerged. What if she just kept going? What if she kept asking for help even if no one listened at first? What if one day someone would finally believe her? She didn't know it yet, but Sarah's journey was far from over. She had hit rock bottom, but she wasn't finished yet. There was still a spark of determination in her heart, a small but growing desire to take back control of her life. But first, she had to find the courage to believe that she deserved better. Little did she know her story was about to take an unexpected turn. Sarah was stuck in a dark place, one where she felt as if there was no way out. The world around her was closing in, and she couldn't see a path forward. Days seemed to blend into each other with no change in sight. But sometimes, life throws in a small spark of hope when you least expect it. This is how Sarah's life started to shift, although she didn't know it at the time. One afternoon, after another long day of avoiding Tom's suspicious questions and hiding her anxiety, Sarah needed to run some errands. It was a simple task: pick up a few groceries for the week. Tom wasn't home, and it felt like a rare moment of freedom, even though it wasn't much. As Sarah walked into the local store, her mind raced with the never-ending worries she had been carrying around for so long. She couldn't shake the thoughts of her unhappy relationship, the empty conversations with friends who never seemed to understand, and the guilt of feeling trapped in her own life. As she pushed the shopping cart down the aisle, she almost didn't notice the man standing in front of her. He was just another person going about his business in the store, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a soft smile. But when their paths crossed, he looked at her with a certain kind of attention that made Sarah pause for a moment. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. There was something different about him. It wasn't that he was being overly friendly or intrusive. Rather, he seemed to have noticed something about her, and when he spoke, his voice was calm and reassuring. "Excuse me," he said. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I couldn't help but notice that you seem a little off. Are you okay? Sarah froze for a moment. She hadn't expected anyone to notice her at all, let alone ask if she was okay. She had gotten so used to pretending everything was fine, hiding her pain behind a mask, that the idea of someone seeing through it caught her off guard. She wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her wanted to say that she was fine, that everything was okay, but the words didn't feel right. There was something about this man's sincere gaze that made her feel as though she could trust him. So without even thinking too much about it, she answered in a soft voice. No, she said quietly. I'm not okay. The man didn't seem surprised. He didn't push her to explain, didn't rush into offering advice. He simply nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He smiled gently, then introduced himself as James. He explained that he wasn't trying to interfere, but that he had been through difficult times himself and knew what it felt like to need someone to talk to. They stood there for a moment, Sarah unsure of what to do. She had never been good at opening up to strangers, especially when it came to her personal life, but there was something comforting about James's calm presence, something that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, someone would finally believe her. James didn't ask probing questions right away. He just listened. He told Sarah that sometimes life throws challenges at us that seem impossible to overcome, but it doesn't mean we're alone in facing them. Sarah, feeling vulnerable yet strangely safe, found herself sharing more than she intended. She talked about the emotional weight she had been carrying for years, the isolation, and the fear that had become a constant companion in her life. She spoke of the hurtful comments, the constant anxiety, and the feeling that no one would ever understand. To her surprise, James didn't dismiss her feelings or tell her that things would get better with time. Instead, he asked if she had ever considered getting help from a local shelter or support group for women. His suggestion didn't feel like a quick fix. It felt like a lifeline. He didn't pressure her or tell her what to do, but simply gave her the idea that there were resources and people who could help. Sarah hadn't heard much about shelters or support groups before. The thought of reaching out to such places had always felt like a last resort, something she might do if things got really bad. But hearing it from James, someone she had just met, made it feel less intimidating. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. As they spoke, Sarah felt a small shift in herself. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though someone had really heard her. James wasn't dismissing her or telling her she was overreacting. He was simply there, listening with kindness and understanding. It felt like a breath of fresh air after holding her breath for so long. She didn't feel like she was being judged, and that was a rare feeling. Sarah knew that she wasn't ready to make any big decisions yet, but James had given her something important: the courage to consider other options, to think that there was help out there if she was willing to reach for it. Before they parted ways, James handed Sarah a small piece of paper with contact information for a local women's shelter and a support hotline. It's always there if you need it, he said gently. But remember, it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to go through this alone. His words stayed with Sarah long after she left the store. For the first time in a long time, she felt like there was someone who believed her, someone who understood the situation she had been living in for so long. That evening, as Sarah returned home, she sat down with the piece of paper in her hand. Tom had been quiet that day, as he often was after a fight, and she couldn't shake the feeling that things were reaching a breaking point. She looked at the number James had given her, wondering if she was brave enough to make the call. She had never felt so conflicted. On one hand, she was terrified of making the wrong move, of angering Tom even more, of facing a future that seemed uncertain and risky. On the other hand, she knew that she couldn't keep living this way. The emotional toll was too much, and the thought of another year or even another month in the same situation made her stomach turn. That night, she tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. Could she really leave? Could she trust anyone enough to help her get out? Every decision seemed so huge, and Sarah felt so small. She knew that taking the first step was the hardest part. But after everything she had been through, after the tears, the sleepless nights, and the endless feeling of being stuck, Sarah realized something important. She deserved more. She deserved peace. She deserved to feel safe and loved, not trapped and afraid. By morning, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to wait any longer. She wasn't going to keep pretending everything was fine. With shaking hands, she dialed the number James had given her. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. The decision to make the call had been a turning point for Sarah. It wasn't an easy choice. It wasn't like flicking a switch where suddenly everything would feel better. But as she sat there holding the phone, she realized that making that first step was the beginning of something big. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had control over her life again, even if it was just a small bit of it. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew she couldn't keep living in fear. She had to at least try. The woman on the other end of the phone was kind and patient. Her voice was warm, making Sarah feel like she wasn't just a case but a person. She listened as Sarah explained her situation, her voice trembling with every word. As she spoke, it felt like a weight was being lifted off her shoulders, and yet it was only the beginning. When she finished, the woman on the phone told her about the local shelter and the resources available to her. There were places she could stay, people who could help her through the next steps, and support systems that would help her heal. It felt surreal to Sarah, like she was finally being seen for who she really was. Not the person her abuser had painted her to be, but someone worthy of care and protection. With that call, everything started to change. The woman on the phone helped Sarah create a plan to leave, a safe way to break free from the life she had been trapped in for so long. But Sarah's heart still raced with anxiety. She knew that leaving wasn't just about finding a safe place to stay. It was about taking her life back, and that scared her more than anything. Could she really do it? Could she really walk away from the person she had loved, even if that love had turned into something unrecognizable? That night, Sarah barely slept. Every little noise made her jump. Every thought in her head felt like a storm. She had been in this relationship for so long, had been controlled and manipulated for so many years, that the idea of freedom seemed overwhelming. What would happen when Tom found out she was leaving? Would he come after her? Would he try to stop her? The questions swirled, and Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But there was something inside her, something small but fierce, that kept reminding her that she couldn't let fear control her any longer. She deserved peace. She deserved to live her life without constantly looking over her shoulder. The next morning, she gathered everything she could, her most important belongings, a few clothes, some money she had saved in secret, and packed them into a bag. She was ready to leave, but there was still so much fear inside her. What if she made the wrong choice? What if things didn't work out? The what-ifs could have paralyzed her, but she kept going. With every step, Sarah felt both fear and determination rising inside her. She was scared, but she wasn't going to let that fear stop her. It was time to act. She left the house quietly, trying not to wake Tom, who was still asleep. The door clicked softly behind her, and she stepped into the world outside. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but as she walked down the street, Sarah felt a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She was walking toward her future, away from the shadows of the past. When she arrived at the shelter, she was greeted with open arms. The people there were kind, understanding, and supportive. It was exactly what she had needed, a safe place to rest, to recover, and to begin again. That night, for the first time in so long, Sarah went to bed without the constant worry that Tom would find her or that something terrible would happen. For the first time in years, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning to live again. But the journey wasn't over. The hardest part was still ahead of her, taking the next steps to rebuild her life. Sarah had to learn how to trust again, not just others but herself. She had spent so many years doubting her own judgment, questioning her worth, that she had to relearn how to believe in herself. The shelter offered more than just physical safety. It offered therapy, support groups, and a place where women like Sarah could heal. The staff there encouraged her to talk about her experiences, to let go of the guilt and shame that had been weighing her down. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She had to unpack all those emotions that had been buried deep inside her, ones that had been slowly eating away at her. Sarah took it one day at a time. At first it felt like a dream where she was slowly coming back to life. She began to recognize the things she had forgotten about herself, her love for art, her sense of humor, her deep compassion for others. She started to reconnect with old friends, people she hadn't seen in years, and they were overjoyed to see her. They didn't know the full story, But they knew she was different, and in that moment Sarah realized just how much she had lost during those years of isolation. She had lost herself. But now, she was slowly finding her way back. As she moved forward, Sarah also began taking legal steps to protect herself. With the help of the shelter's resources, she filed for a restraining order against Tom. The process was daunting and filled with difficult conversations, but each step made her feel stronger. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a survivor, someone who had taken control of her future. The road wasn't easy, and there were moments when Sarah felt overwhelmed by the weight of everything she had to do. But with each passing day, she began to feel more confident in her ability to create a new life. She knew that she wasn't alone in this. The shelter, the support group, her friends, they were all there offering help and encouragement. There were times when Sarah still had doubts. The scars of her past weren't easily erased, and the memories of the pain she had endured lingered. But each time those doubts crept in, she reminded herself of the decision she had made to leave, to fight for her freedom. She remembered the kindness of James, the stranger who had believed her when no one else did. She remembered the first time she felt heard, truly heard, and she carried that with her as she moved forward. Every day, Sarah took another step toward healing. It wasn't a straight path, and sometimes it felt like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But as time went on, she found herself growing stronger, more confident, and more in control of her life. She was no longer defined by the pain of her past, but by the courage it took to break free from it. And through it all, she never forgot that one small spark of hope, when a stranger believed her, when someone saw the truth and offered a hand to help her. That simple act of kindness had changed everything for Sarah, and she would never forget it. As time passed, Sarah's life slowly began to transform. It wasn't a perfect or easy process, but every small victory felt like a giant step toward reclaiming her life. The shelter had become her safe haven, the place where she could finally breathe freely without fear, guilt, or shame. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah had a sense of peace. The nightmares, the anxious thoughts, and the constant worry that had been her reality for so long slowly began to fade, replaced with a quiet sense of hope. Sarah was slowly discovering herself again. She'd forgotten what it was like to laugh freely, to enjoy the simple things in life without the heavy weight of fear dragging her down. She remembered how much she loved painting and began to pick up her old brushes again. Her art became a way for her to express the feelings she could never put into words. Each brushstroke felt like another piece of herself that she was reclaiming. It wasn't just about the art. It was about finding joy in the things that used to bring her happiness, before everything changed. Despite the newfound freedom, Sarah knew that her journey was far from over. She still had scars from the years of emotional turmoil she had lived through, and while she was learning to move forward, the memories of her past sometimes crept back into her thoughts, uninvited and unwelcome. But Sarah had learned something important over the past few months. Healing wasn't linear. It wasn't a straight path that led from pain to peace. Sometimes it took 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And that was okay. What mattered was that she kept going no matter how difficult it got. One of the hardest things Sarah had to come to terms with was her own self-worth. She had spent so many years convinced that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't deserve to be happy or loved. She had believed the lies that Tom had fed her, that she was too weak, too emotional, too much of a burden. But every time she took a step toward rebuilding her life, every time she reached out for help or spoke up for herself, Sarah was proving to herself that she was strong, that she was capable, and that she was deserving of a better life. The support group at the shelter became another pillar of strength for Sarah. She was amazed by the courage of the other women she met. Each of them had their own story, their own struggles, but they shared a common goal: to heal and rebuild their lives. Hearing their stories and sharing her own helped Sarah realize that she wasn't alone in this. There were women just like her, all fighting to take back their lives, to find peace and happiness again. The bonds they formed were powerful, and Sarah soon felt a sense of community she hadn't felt in years. It was a reminder that no matter how difficult things had been, there was always strength in numbers, and there was always someone who understood. With the support of the group, Sarah started to take small but meaningful steps to rebuild her life. She enrolled in a local college course to continue her education, something she had always wanted to do but had put off for years. She didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but she knew it was the right choice. She began to see that there were opportunities for her, that the future wasn't as dark as she had once thought. With every class she attended, every new skill she learned, Sarah started to believe in her potential again. But there was still one thing that weighed heavily on her heart: Tom. Even though she had escaped, the emotional toll of the relationship still lingered. Sarah had moved out, gotten the restraining order, and cut off contact with him. But the fear that he might try to return to her life sometimes crept in, like an unwelcome shadow. She knew that she needed to fully let go of him to fully heal, but that wasn't something that could happen overnight. It was a process. And with each passing day, as she became stronger and more confident, Sarah knew she was taking one more step toward freedom from him. The day Sarah decided to go to the courthouse to finalize her restraining order, she felt a wave of emotion. It wasn't just about legal protection. It was about taking back her power. Walking into the courthouse, standing in front of the judge, and knowing that her past was finally being acknowledged felt like a turning point. She was no longer the woman hiding in the shadows, afraid of the man who had controlled her life for so long. She was standing in the light, her voice finally heard. The order was granted, and with it Sarah's sense of peace grew a little bit stronger. She was no longer bound by the fear of him coming after her. She was free. It wasn't long before Sarah realized that she wanted to do more than just survive. She wanted to help others who had been through similar experiences. She began volunteering at the shelter, offering support and guidance to women who were in the same position she had once been in. Sharing her story wasn't easy, but it felt empowering. She wanted to be the person who helped others believe in themselves the way James had helped her believe in her own worth. She realized that in a way she had come full circle. The woman who had once been too afraid to speak up was now standing in front of others, offering hope and encouragement. Sarah also reconnected with her family. After so many years of keeping her struggles hidden, it felt strange at first to open up to them. But they welcomed her with open arms, offering unconditional love and support. They hadn't fully understood what she had gone through, but now they saw her for who she truly was: strong, resilient, and brave. The reconciliation was healing in itself. It reminded Sarah that no matter how lost she had felt, there were always people who cared about her and wanted the best for her. Over time, Sarah's life began to take shape in ways she hadn't imagined before. She moved into a small apartment of her own, decorated it with paintings and plants, and created a space where she could finally be herself. The fear of the past still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. Every new step she took was a reminder that she was capable of living the life she had once dreamed of. She had faced darkness and emerged into the light, and with each passing day, she felt more and more like the person she had always been inside: strong, independent, and free. Looking back on her journey, Sarah was overwhelmed with gratitude. It had been a difficult road, one filled with moments of doubt, pain, and fear, but it had also been a road of growth, healing, and self-discovery. The person she was now was not the person she had been before, but she was proud of the woman she had become. She was no longer defined by the abuse or the past that had tried to hold her down. She was Sarah, a survivor, a fighter, and a beacon of hope for others who needed to hear that they too could break free. And so, Sarah continued to walk forward, knowing that her future was hers to create. The past no longer held the same power over her. She had learned that no matter how hard life gets, there is always hope. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in you, one person to help you find your way, and everything can change.